All right, welcome back to the channel. So, despite the fact that Devin Haney is officially fighting Yuriorkis Gamboa, there are still a lot of videos coming out and statements coming out from around Team Haney about Gary Russell Jr. And out of the mouths of many boxing fans, this is starting to look like the boy who cried wolf, and it is going to backfire on Devin Haney. And many people are saying, look, man, this whole conversation about Devin Haney, about Gary Russell Jr. is just a way to cover up the conversation that he was going to go fight a bum in Yuriorkis Gamboa. I don't necessarily agree with all of these points of views, or maybe not any of them, but they are legitimate points of views that are out there that are sitting on the neck of Devin Haney that he should pay attention to. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. Devin Haney will be fighting Yuriorkis Gamboa. He will not be fighting Gary Russell Jr. This is not a big surprise to me at all. I was actually pretty close to the negotiation, closer than I wanted to be. Got involved when I had to, tried to stay out of it for the most part. But I knew pretty early on that that fight was not going to happen, and that Devin Haney was already in camp for Yuriorkis Gamboa. Gary Russell Jr. hasn't even come near a camp. Once they started talking about a November 7th date, you just knew that the fight was dead, because no matter all of the other conversations going on about the who shot John and all that, none of that stuff could get over the fact that there's already a fight date for Devin Haney with Yuriorkis Gamboa. And once we got past November 7th, we were into the 8 weeks. We knew that this was done. So I sat back and just watched and was like, why are we going through all this? Why is this all? What's all the attacks on Gary Russell Jr.? Why are we still acting like this fight can even be made? Why are we talking about term sheets and contracts that don't matter because the fight's not going to happen? DAZN said a week ago that November 7th, he was going to fight either Devin Haney or Yuriorkis Gamboa. Once Gary Russell Jr. said he could not fight on November 7th because he's not in a training camp, it was a wrap, and the rest was a bunch of talk for show. Now, here is the problem for Devin Haney. And I am going to share this and refer to another great champion who is now in a very similar situation because he did something that was very similar to what Devin Haney just did. And that is, or is doing, and that is Terrence Bud Crawford. Terrence Crawford, by many people, is considered the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. And just maybe 2 years ago, he had a absolutely excellent fan base in the black boxing community. People were standing up for him, and he was the #1 viewed guy on ESPN. If you recall, when Top Rank moved from HBO to ESPN, when the ratings first, this is before ESPN Plus, when Julius Ndungo and Terrence Crawford fought, right? Their fight did like 2.2 million. It did way more than Vasily Lomachenko. It was clear that that fight, that Terrence Crawford was, of all of the top-ranked fighters, that Terrence Crawford was the one that had the most fan support, right? At least on the television rankings. Fast forward 2 years ago, and Terrence Crawford cannot walk down the aisle of a grocery store without an old lady popping up and calling him a duck. Okay? Can't do it. Fans that have been on my page that were going at me for years, it started like this. And I'm going to get to the Devin Haney thing. This is important for the Devin Haney thing. Stay with me, because this is important for Devin Haney in this use of the media and all of that type of stuff that goes down. It can backfire. And it can backfire big time, like it is backfiring on Terrence Crawford. So what happened with Terrence? What's the comparison with Terrence Crawford? Terrence Crawford had a bunch of support in the black community, in the black boxing community, #1 pound-for-pound guy in the world. Many people, like maybe 50% of the people, thought that Terrence Crawford was ducking Errol Spence. 50% might have thought Errol Spence Jr. was ducking Terrence Crawford. But it was fairly even down the line. But then something happened that was a problem. Tim Bradley jumped out and yelled on ESPN that everybody in the PBC was ducking Bud Crawford. Everybody was ducking Bud Crawford. That included Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, Errol Spence, Yordanis Ugas, Keith Thurman. Everybody over there is ducking Terrence Crawford. That's what Tim Bradley screamed on ESPN. But then what happened after that? Almost everybody that Tim Bradley said was ducking Terrence Crawford turned around and said that they wanted the fight. As soon as they said that, and Bud couldn't make those fights, and for whatever reason, either Bud didn't want the fight, Bud was saying the fight couldn't get made, Bob Arum said there's not enough money, didn't matter. At a certain point in time, when you call 8, 9 guys a duck, 6, 7 guys a duck, and then they turn around and they all try to fight you, and you can't fight them, you lose everything. You lose all the respect, and that's what happened to Terrence Crawford. He lost his whole fan base thinks he's ducking the PBC. There's fighters, there are people that were standing up for Terrence Crawford for a year and a half, 2 years that are like, look, I just can't do this anymore. This guy's just ducking. Now, what does this got to do with Devin Haney? Devin Haney is also, right about now, the boy who cried duck. Vasily Lomachenko's ducking him. Gervonta Davis is ducking him. Gary Russell Jr. ducked him. Who else ducked him? Robert Easter ducked him, right? Everybody that I hear around Devin Haney, like in the lightweight division, what's his name? Ryan Garcia's ducking him. I have literally seen Devin Haney call out or his fans say that dang near every lightweight in the world is ducking him. Now, here's the problem. I would guess 80% of the people that looked at this Gary Russell Jr. thing with Devin Haney think that Team Haney was the problem. Which is why you keep seeing these videos being put out trying to put the blame on Gary Russell Jr. I have a live stream, and my live stream has the same people in it that are in other people's live streams, and I hear what the tone of it is. The tone of it is, look, man, Devin Haney never wanted to fight Gary Russell Jr. because he's already in camp for Yuriorkis Gamboa. Now, people can talk about the term sheets and this and that and the other thing, but the fact of the matter is that is the public perception out of this by and large, okay? And it is not an unreasonable perception. But he moves on, he fights Yuriorkis Gamboa. Now, what's the problem? Now that, before, everybody's ducking Devin Haney, nobody's questioning it. But now they went so hard on Gary Russell Jr., not everybody believed it. So what happens with the next fight that doesn't get made? What happens with the next fight that doesn't get made, where Luke Campbell says, I want that fight, and that fight doesn't get made? Or say Javier Fortuna beats Gary Russell Jr., and then Javier Fortuna turns around and tries to fight Gary Russell Jr., and that fight doesn't happen. Okay? Eventually, that media-created push for Devin Haney is going to be ineffective. It's going to be ineffective to the ears of fans, just like the story I told you, the boy who cried wolf. Wolf, there's no wolf. Wolf, there's no wolf. Wolf, there's no wolf. All of a sudden you cry wolf when there's a wolf, nobody believes you, right? That's the story of the boy who cries wolf. Well, this is kind of, flipped on it. Duck, the boy that called duck, oh, he's ducking me. Well, he didn't want to fight you. Maybe he is ducking you. Oh, he's ducking me. Ryan Garcia is ducking me. Well, hey, he didn't fight you, so maybe Ryan Garcia is ducking you. Well, Gervonta Davis didn't fight me. Well, Gervonta Davis didn't fight you, so maybe he is ducking you. Gary Russell Jr. ain't ducking you, though. You just offered him a fight in a time frame that he couldn't accept. The negotiations started in the beginning of September. You were already in camp training for a fight. Once September 8th happened, everybody knows the fight's not taking place. So why are we still going on it? And we're still going over it. You're still having people who are connected to the Haney camp, apparently, still putting stuff out. No, man, the boy that cries wolf, you protest too much, man. Like, that's the only way I can explain it. You protest too much. There should not be, from this point on, there really shouldn't be any conversations about Gamboa. About Gary Russell Jr. And similarly, from the Gary Russell Jr. camp, there shouldn't be any talk really about Devin Haney. There should be talk about what his next fight's going to be for Gary Russell. Is it going to be Tug Nyambayar or whatever? The guy's going to get a rematch for that. Is he really going to fight Javier Fortuna up at 135 pounds? What is the situation going to be for Gary Russell Jr.? For Devin Haney, really, it might be better for them to continue to talk about Gary Russell Jr. because I don't know if anybody gives a fat flying rat about a fight with Yuriorkis Gamboa, a guy that literally just came off of getting decapitated and having a torn ACL against Gervonta Davis. So, I mean, it's just not a good, this whole thing to me, man, really, hopefully, let me put it in a positive way. Hopefully, what will happen is that people will forget about this negotiation with Gary Russell Jr. and Devin Haney, and then Devin Haney will actually start to be able to get the top level fights, right? So if he can fight the winner of Vasily Lomachenko versus Teofimo Lopez, that would be great. However, I have a suspicion that the conversation is going to go like this, that the winner is ducking Devin Haney. The winner is going to duck Devin Haney, but the winner is never going to really fight Devin Haney. Devin Haney is going to wind up at 140 pounds, and his claim to fame at 135 is going to be that everybody ducked him. You know what I mean? I just do not really know if that is, I don't know if that's the best path forward for Devin Haney. I would just appreciate, man, if people could just call it down and call it like it is. If somebody is in a mandatory position and they don't fight you, that's a duck, right? But a guy 2 weight classes down who wanted to fight Terrence Crawford, but yet you jump in the middle of it and the negotiation doesn't work right, trying to frame that guy for a duck and try to humiliate that, it's just not a good look. And what goes around comes around. It better not happen to somebody else and have all this foolishness go on, man, because then people are not going to believe and have trust in Devin Haney, and they're going to think that he's pretty much just a media created hype job. And I would hate to see that with Devin Haney. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.